personas did we talk to?
Sorry, Sarah. Hope that was okay.
That's okay. Yeah. Do you want me to start over?
No, go ahead. It's a
Okay.
short slot, so let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone we talked to was a developer. We were unable to recruit anyone from the operations SRE persona to talk to us. That being said, I do know that the internal infrastructure team at GitLab makes use of Sentry for incident investigation, primarily using the stack traces to hone in on where problems are in code. So that was why they are listed within the customers that we're serving. Jobs to be done. I'm going to zoom in on this. Majority of the jobs to be done for this particular category have to do with fixing customer complaints, support tickets, taking time to manually triage lists of problems or sort through lists of errors to find needle in the haystack, and then fixing these and communicating the status of these problems. So this nicely aligns with a lot of the incident response workflows that we've done. So we're able to lean on a lot of that work as we continue to solve problems for this category. Pain-wise, so as I said before, tracking tickets in multiple tools is a pain. It's tedious, time-consuming. Review and triage of error lists is manual. Has to be done frequently, either weekly, daily. We heard from everybody on that. And requires a certain level of innate context. So tribal knowledge is necessary for making this go quickly. And then lastly, errors are noisy, and it takes a lot of time to review them and find what's important. Below, I'm not going to read through all of these, but we detailed all of the hypotheses that we had prior to the interviews. And so you can see what they were beforehand. And then I've also listed validated and whether or not it's a problem we're choosing to solve for, or if it was not validated and it was not a problem. These have guided the solution we'll chat about in the third column. We're going to dive into the business case now. Any questions so far?
I already put mine in, so when you get a chance to go through those later, that's fine. Yep.
So I think, Scott, you had majority of your questions on the business case, so I'm happy to address those as I go through this.
Yeah,
okay. Perfect. So reach. Who is this going to affect? Who's going to be happy that we're solving this problem? We've narrowed it down to developer or SRE persona who's currently using Sentry or whom does not use anything. And the reason for this is individuals who are embedded on a workflow with another error tracking tool, even if they are using GitLab, are likely not going to put up with the switching costs to dig into using Sentry. Those using Sentry will benefit from this. Those not using anything will also benefit from this because Sentry does have a free tier product. Scott posed an excellent question. Do we have a sense for Sentry's total customer count and or market share? Not right now. So I'm working on gathering this information via survey and the analyst relations team. So market share wise, information that we do have, error tracking in and of itself is kind of niche. There are a handful of products that focus on this particular incident identification and response. And there are a number of other larger players in the market, Dynatrace, Splunk, New Relic, who offer this as part of their market, as part of their product suite.
Okay.
So survey is going to give us information on what's the distribution of people who are using error tracking tools, what are they using? And then analyst research is going to give us information on how big is Sentry, how many people are using their tool right now, and then among their competitors, how much of the market share that they have. I apologize for not having that to inform this conversation today.
It's fine. This is a work in progress.
And I do think it's safe to say that Sentry is the largest open sourced or free tier product in this space.
And you said our team uses it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Impact. So quickly increase monitor monthly active users, increase stickiness of GitLab and the operations workflows, achieve breadth and additional product category aligning with our vision. And then Scott, on your question, validated error tracking is worth building ourselves. So the path to this would be bring error tracking based on this integrated workflow with Sentry to a usable state today where we can interest people in using it. Today it's too minimal right now to have attracted enough interest to get feedback. And then to make the decision of if we actually want to not depend on Sentry and own this entire functionality and process would be, are we able to integrate this into the main software development workflows of a large percentage of our users? So tracked based on instances or projects. And then if we're able to get majority of the GitLab engineering team to dog food the viable version of error tracking, I think that's also a really strong indicator of this is worth spending more time on.
Yep. So you want to use this as a chance to harden the workflow using Sentry as the data source. If the team loves it, we'd have two options. Just stay with Sentry and maybe continue to iterate on it, or build it ourselves. Build the error generation ourselves. Okay.
I think there's a
Do you see a
second
world
question.
where we integrate with other players?
I'm so sorry you cut out for the first part of that question.
I said, do you see a world where we integrate with other players than Sentry? Or would that be counter to our goals to sort of own monitoring ourselves?
I see a world where we enable people to send error alerts from other tools to an endpoint.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
And Kenny, so sorry we cut you off.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I agree with similar to like what we do with Prometheus. You can send Prometheus compatible stuff to us if you want, but we'll also make it easy for you to get up and running with Prometheus metrics. But I do think there's a second question of, the standard workflows for operational professionals or like observability workflows are a little bit in flux today. So it might end up being that people just don't alarm off of errors like this in the future. So I think there is a world where the tech and standard space evolves where error tracking is not even relevant. So I think it's prudent to de-risk us making a big bet here until we're pretty clear on that.
Okay, that's a great risk. I would add that to the risk section.
Yeah, I'm gonna give me 1 second to get down there. And I'll make this.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. All right, risks. And I have a big long answer in here, Scott, to one of your why.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just answer your question.
Okay.
So one, error tracking tool does not get used since people are invested in other tools and switching costs are too high. We're gonna learn this based on the spread of tools that our customer base is using. Two, which I think is what you had the question on, issues are too constrained to properly be errors. So this is something that we're managing as we were building out incident management. We chose to use issues as incidents.
Okay.
So issues within GitLab are dev tasks, support tickets, discussions, pretty much a way to centralize a conversation about some topic. And a few things that we ran into when we're trying to figure out how to design incident management was that functionality or features or workflows that we wanted to add would significantly change how issues work overall. And so we had to adjust UX for that. And I would say we're still a little limited in that department. The reason we did that though.
I understand. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And then other ones, Sentry partnership.
Well, I do want to put a pin on that because you were just using the incidents one, and I think the risk you're highlighting here is that there's a whole nother class of things that aren't incidents that are minor called errors that would even further break this UX pattern. Yeah.
So at some point we may have to face the fact that issues don't serve all purposes and we may need different objects.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Sentry partnership inhibits progress on integration. And then the one that Kenny added, tech space obviates the need for error tracking. All right, moving on. Overall, I'm going to summarize this section. User priority is low for this. We do not have a pile of customer requests for this category. I believe that's for two reasons. One, current implementation of error tracking in Sentry is too minimal, or for Sentry. So I'm advocating for a handful of milestones so that we can get it to a usable place and then really test the feedback that we get back for that. On the other hand, business priority is high as an investment in this category, contributes to our single app vision. So I think a balance between the two of those is limit and intelligently invest some engineering team's time to get it usable and see what feedback we get.
Yeah.
Scott posed a great question. Do you have other work that is higher priority, or is this your highest priority? And we do have other work within the monitor stage that could be slotted as higher priority. Dashboarding, metrics, the operations workflow that Dove, Kenny, and I have spent the last 3 weeks up-leveling the vision on. Investing engineering time in that. If we were ready in those categories right now, if we were ready for the build phase, I would advocate for us to be working on those.
I see. So this one's more mature in terms of your thinking on it?
This one is more mature in terms of thinking on it, in terms of design on it, in terms of teams being prepped to move forward on this.
Okay. Cool.
I have a question. And
yeah, Christy.
So my question is, we talk about wanting to improve the experience in production so that we can get more feedback. Do we have a plan for how we intend to get more feedback? How do we expect that feedback to come in?
Sure. Yeah. So we've gotten error tracking viable, we've shipped it, we've moved on to something else. How are we gathering feedback? That's your question?
Yeah, yes, that's my question.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. Dog fooding with the engineering team in GitLab. Working with, yep. And we have tons of engineering teams for this. So it's not just the poor overworked infrastructure team that we have to depend on to start using incident management. We have so many teams in GitLab that will be able to start getting to use this. And many engineering managers are really interested in making it easier and motivating engineers to start checking Sentry more often and not just waiting for customer support tickets to come in. So yeah.
One pin on that dog fooding thing, the reason why that's possible is because this would be part of the GDK. So it's not just happening with the production instances, it's also developers in their own environments would start seeing errors and track the errors for their dev environments.
Thank you, Kenny.
Yeah, thanks for that. So that gets us a lot of internal feedback, which sounds like it's valuable. Do we have thoughts about how we're getting external feedback?
So we'll be able to get a list of, I'm able to pull a list of customers that we have who have Sentry error tracking enabled. And so partnering with the technical account managers, we'll be able to reach out to them and engage them that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then I'll just put a thought out there, but look, you've obviously put a ton of thought into this, so this may or may not be relevant, but I think we know the most expensive way to test something is in production. So if there's any way that we could work with our research team to get you more feedback without having to write a lot of code, that would be ideal, but maybe that's not possible in this case.
Amelia is leading the usability test efforts for the, I think, 8 or 9 issue features that we have planned and upcoming. And so she'll be validating a number of the ones that we have, not for this next coming milestone, but for 12.6, as whether or not we need to invest in those to make this usable or if it's going to require less work. So we are doing that. Thank you so much for putting that out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We have 10 minutes. So again, hypotheses are below. I'll let people read, and then if you want to post questions on this asynchronously to me, I will respond to them today. So for the solution column, Amelia and I took some best guesses at what some of the formatting or questions in here were a little confusing. So if we filled this out incorrectly, happy to iterate and submit it back for review. Summarized the solution to the problem above. You know, managing stuff in multiple tools, updating tickets in multiple places is a pain. So as much as we can surface Sentry Intelligence within GitLab, the interface for building, storing, running your code, the issues which represent the dev tasks and the incidents, we can help to reduce that amount of time spent triaging or flipping back and forth or copy pasting stuff in the GitLab issues, changing or updating tickets, so on and so forth. Additionally, we've got the ability to, based on a lot of functionality that Sentry has already built, correlate errors to different releases or different merge requests within GitLab. We're still exploring how we want that to look, but that's a huge differentiator that we have with GitLab. I've estimated this to be medium, as it is neither small nor an enormous effort, and advocating for about 2 milestones of work.
When do you think the higher priority stuff will be ready to go? Well before that, or does the timing work out okay?
We could pivot after 1 milestone if we wanted to. We've divided the 2 milestones into somewhat different themes. The first one is improving the existing integration interface within GitLab. And then the second one is work to correlate errors to releases or merge requests. Again, don't have mocks for that just yet. But if we wanted to pause work after 1 milestone and switch to work that helps us compete further with Datadog, we can be ready to do that.
Great.
And then go to market. I'm just doing a time check.
You're doing good.
Perfect. Yep. Okay. For our go-to-market plan, measures, how are we going to track success of this or validate that we shouldn't invest further in this particular category? Continue to add to the usage ping. So instances with Sentry enabled, projects with Sentry enabled, instances creating issues from errors, clusters with Sentry deployed. We have a handful of other metrics that I could also list here. And then positive anecdotal feedback and ideas. So both from our internal customers and then those that we pull back through the survey, or that we can pull information on what domains have Sentry enabled and talk to them through their technical account managers.
Maybe we could have something about the internal teams, like, you know, broad adoption internally. And then I would also suggest we use Pendo to see how customers flow through this, and if they use it, what's the workflow. We should have Pendo enabled here soon.
Awesome.
So,
okay.
So you would be able to, for .com customers, see see how many people use it, B, see how they flow to it, and C, then map that back to packages and that kind of thing, so you could see is there a particular segment that's using this. Make sense?
Yes, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. And then would you like me to read through the messaging, or let people read that on their own?
I think people can read it. It's quite good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And then go-to-market motion. So for categories going minimal to viable, conversations with our PMM team have said, as we move up in maturity, if you're moving something to complete or lovable, we do larger pushes, but for something that's going minimal to viable, They recommend, will be a primary block in the release post, part of the main story for whatever milestone that happens in, a blog in the partnership with Sentry, perhaps one published by Sentry and GitLab, and then partnering with PMM and then technical marketing to enable the sales team, and then weave that into the operations demo that we have.
And Sarah, I would just say that because we're like internally dogfooding this primarily, well, not primarily, but a large user would be the developers. Let's not, I think one thing we could do that would be a little bit of a disservice to this effort is if we highlighted it only for operations in the like in production sense, but it's also useful and we'll be using it for this in development, in your development environment analysis. So let's just make sure we highlight it, not just in operations context.
Got it.
And Sarah, can you go to the first section? I think I had a question there on persona. I want to cover that.
Yeah. Primary persona one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Because you listed several.
Yep. And so the people that we spoke with were all developers.
Okay.
DevOps engineers, operations engineers, and SREs were listed as our internal infrastructure team is using it today. Externally, we were not able to recruit people with these titles to interview them about this.
Okay.
But future iterations, that may be possible.
I would please note that developer is primary and the others are secondary.
Got it.
And that way we can make sure whatever we build works for devs.
First.
It may very well work for the rest of them, but let's make sure we get it right for the primary.
Got it. Awesome.
Anything else you wanted to cover? Questions from anybody else?
If not content questions, Scott and Christy, I did have a like, did we approach this problem? Sarah and I have been working together. I want to make sure this is meeting the expectation of my first review of an opportunity canvas review.
I was about to provide some macro feedback here.
Okay.
This is a really great first canvas. Nice work.
Awesome.
Expect questions. The fact that I had some number of questions is normal and expected. The point of this is to pressure test your ideas. So questions are good. I remember Sid saying somebody, if your proposal doesn't get any questions, it probably wasn't that great. So the fact that this generated some questions is all good. It was a really well conceived, well researched, well laid out. So really, really good job. The other thing that I would say for you and anybody else listening, had we decided not to do this, that's a win too. Like the game is to go out and investigate something and investigate a problem. And if we decide it's not worth doing or not worth doing now, that's a win. So I'm a go on this. I feel like it sounds like you don't have something more pressing that's ready to go. So this makes sense. I think it's well formulated. I like the fact that it's not huge. And I like the fact that our internal teams are going to use it. And so this project makes sense to me. But had you had higher priority stuff ready to go, that's okay if we say not now. So just so you know.
Great. We need to say that as much as we can, because that's something I think that we haven't thought about in the past. And my feedback to you was going to be, thank you. This was obviously very thoughtfully done. So I appreciate that.
Sarah, what was your feedback having gone through it on this process and on this doc?
I like the process. I think that the format for the mural canvas, and Jeremy and I reviewed each other's and walked through this, was pretty time consuming. I will say I like the visual consumption of this. It's nice to have the title. It's nice to have the colors. This clearly divides it into columns. But trying to format this, or I can't resolve comments in Mural, I can't edit comments in Mural, sometimes people don't have emails set up for comments. There's just some things we need to iterate on.
Yeah.
And we might be able to achieve it using GitLab issue templates, but we might lose the nice visual treatment.
It is nice to have it on one page.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy stepped up and created a Google Docs version, which we'll go through in just a second. So,
perfect. Okay.
It sounds like
trying it in Google Docs.
the thought process it required you to go through, and having it on one page was valuable. I can tell you, as someone who didn't know anything about this area, I learned a lot in 30 minutes, and that's the point of these. So
great.
You can bring the rest of your team along, you can bring marketing along, you can bring sales along. Without it, with just a bunch of issues strung together, it's pretty hard to get a picture. So this has a ton of value for me.
Okay, great.
So the point of doing this in Mural, and I won't linger on this at all, but was just to try it out and see whether or not it would work well. And so I'm glad Jeremy's already done one in Google Docs, and I hope we'll take the same approach. It's like do 2 or 3 and look at it and go, was this better? And then if it was better, shift over. If it wasn't better, then pivot again.
Great.
All right.
And I do like go for it.
I was just going to say, I agree with Kenny's sentiment in the MR that we should be trying to dog food as much as possible. So like the ideal state is to have it in GitLab, but I'm keen to see what y'all think of the Google Docs. So I'm happy to take some feedback on that when I present in a couple minutes.
Awesome. All right, so we're good to go on this. Please leverage this, Sarah, to bring your team and everybody else along. And I feel like there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. All right, so over to you, Jeremy.
Sarah, was there something else you wanted to say? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was just going to agree that having a single page for giving it to someone else who has no context of the problem is much faster to consume. So however we solve that.
Totally. Great. So Sarah, I converted my mural to a Google Doc, so I'm keen to see what you think of what I'm about to show off. So the link to the Google Doc is in the agenda. Please, as we go, I don't think folks have had a chance to comment on it yet. I'm gonna chat about different areas of the canvas at a high level for 2 minutes. Please drop your questions into the agenda, and then I'll take a look at that and I'll respond kind of in turn there. So I'm gonna just share my screen real quick here. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about managing risk on an instance with fine-grained access control. So the context for this validation and this canvas is right now we've been exploring the idea of how we can add fine-grained access control for users into the product. Where we're at right now is we've been doing some exploration for about a month or so. We're starting to kind of converge on a solution, and we have the plan right now, if we are good to go, to pursue an MVC in our next release in 12.5. So the recommendation that I'm proposing right now is that we greenlight the MVC. There are probably some unanswered questions to answer in parallel on the business case side. But right now, the recommendation is that we pursue the MVC, ship that, get some customer feedback, and kind of iterate from there. So summarizing this at a high level, I'll tell you a story. You're a medium to large enterprise. You're especially someone who operates in a regulated industry like finance, like medicine. And when you use GitLab or any kind of product, you're faced with this choice of this question of how you stay compliant and maintain compliance with those regulatory frameworks and products that you're using. In GitLab, we have a role-based access control system that has 5 roles for defining permissions for projects and groups. And there are 2 challenges with this. Number one is it's hierarchical, where roles always inherit permissions from lower roles. And you always inherit your roles and what you can do into different subgroups. So it's a very broad-based kind of solution when it comes to role-based access to permissioning. So, as an enterprise, you're faced with this dilemma. You're faced with, either you generally are overly restrictive, you tie down users and what they can do to, roles that restrict what they're able to do and, kind of suffer from velocity and slow down development. Or you become overly permissive, you give everyone maintainer rights, which allows them to do things like, merchant protected branches, but you kind of cross your fingers and hope that nothing goes Or, you do what some organizations are doing now in GitLab, which is they use our APIs and they write custom automation and scripting on top of like our back, and do things like run cron jobs every single day to make sure no one's doing things that they're not supposed to do. But that requires like a ton of investment and maintenance. So that's really the problem that we're trying to solve here with this kind of with like fine-grained access control, is like we need to be able to manage risk for these customers by having this like really customizable control of what users are able to do in GitLab, especially for these like medium and large enterprises. So the business case for this is pretty strong. Like we've done some UX research on permissions. You can click on this link and kind of see what we've done in the past. And we noticed that about 48% of users in a survey are encountering serious limitations with our current permission system. So what we don't know is we don't know like the total addressable market for the number of users or a number of GitLab customers or prospects to consider this this is a must-have for us. We're absolutely blocked from being able to adopt GitLab. But we know that it's significant for enterprises that suffer from this problem. It does tend to be a hard blocker. There are, this custom roles issue that was closed a while back that has a ton of upvotes and demand from the community. And there's also this TAM CS top list of customer issues, and it's in the top 5 in terms of the business needs that at least CS is hearing from their customers. I think the challenge here is to delivering a strong solution is really around product inertia. Ideally, when you build a permission system early on, you want to kind of get it mostly right the first time. And because we have this general kind of, broad-based solution, it's really challenging to change later. Engineering is complex. And then being able to ship something without breaking changes, for instance, coming over from older versions, is also really challenging. In terms of urgency and priority, that's probably number 2 on compliance's roadmap. I think number 1 was probably continuing to iterate on our audit management system, and then continue to add more and more audit events to the scope of what users are able to track in the product. I think number 2 is really this. The reason is that there's not customers have already are aware and have already are using other systems, if this is a hard barrier for them. So they have evaluated GitLab, they're oh, they don't have the access control that we want, so we're not going to worry about it. So there are customers that are using it now. I don't know if we're going to post this video publicly, so I'll refrain from specifics. But there's a document here where I talked about specific needs from specific customers that are named there, and you can see and enumerate some of their specific needs. So what have we learned so far on this particular problem space? Well, there are a number of assumptions here. I won't go through every single one, but the takeaway is that I started out this exploration thinking there are too many use cases to solve with feature by feature configuration. So we need some kind of new layer on top that, I'm calling policies at the moment. There's a need for different types of policy restrictions based off of different projects. So some projects are revenue generating and need very restrictive rules. And then some are inner-sourcing projects that are created by individual developers that we can be a little more relaxed on. So there's differences here in the problem space that we need to kind of understand. And we've done some work to understand that and prioritize our use cases. I'm going to shut up for just a minute, now that I've covered kind of the high level of the project and business case, and I'll check and see if there are any questions. Cool.
Can I ask one real quick? On the customer, is there an overlap between customers who want or need this and customers who are using third-party identity providers like LDAP?
For sure. I think that there needs to be a connection built between those. The ideal workflow is being able to say, I'm onboarding a new employee. They're going to be an ops person, and I can drop them into an ops group in Active Directory, and they immediately get mapped into GitLab and then have an appropriate level of permissions that's appropriate for their job title. So yeah, there's absolutely a link that we need to make sure we can create there. And right now the solution is going to, I'm proposing, is going to use groups in GitLab so that we are able to write policies that can use groups as logic to say if we have an ops group, that is our operations people that belong to a certain group. Well, we need to be able to constrain or write policies that are specific for those people that are in that group. So since we already map into groups using things like LDAP group sync, that allows us to kind of make the connection and hopefully create a good experience.
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm asking this directly, my question is one where I'm visualizing a Venn diagram. Like, of the customers who want this, do all of them fit into the bubble that they use LDAP? Because that might alter your solution space. Or is it that, you know, only 25% of them overlap?
I would think that the vast majority of these users who are enterprise customers use some type of centralized entity management solution. So I would imagine that there's a massive amount of overlap.
Cool.
Scott asked some great questions. Looks like there's no single persona we're targeting, which makes you nervous. Could we at least target an administrator role? Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is I consider this like a director executive level kind of need, and like city systems administrator I think is the closest persona that we have to that. So I think that that makes total sense. We can definitely add that in. How many interviews have we done on this for personas? I think that's also a really good question. We've done, I think, three or four interviews. There is a policies exploration document that it doesn't look like I've linked to, so I'll add that to the problem space. But we've done a number of and these are generally, the type of personas are lead developers and or system administrators. So I think that also kind of validates that persona as the most relevant one. And is there something else higher priority or that's ready for build? I would say yes. On compliance, like I mentioned, the audit events tool that we have in GitLab, I think is the highest priority, but I think that it's a long-term project that we can parallelize with this effort. The reason is that the challenge there is audit management. Audit events is not complete in GitLab. There are a number of events that we don't capture, and for that same type of customer, enterprise compliance type consumer, they're very nervous about an event happening that they won't have the events to be able to explore on. So we are continuing to iterate on audit events kind of in parallel with this, but I think this is very high in terms of priority.
Okay. So you feel like you can make material progress on both. You don't need to pick one or the other.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I think that, there's only so much parallelization. There's only so much, it's a mythical man month. We can't just throw all my developers at this one problem space. We have to parallelize something else. And I think that this is the right choice.
Cool. I just wanted to make sure we
Yeah.
weren't putting I just want to make sure we weren't delaying something else that was higher priority.
No, it makes total sense.
Great.
So on the solution, there's a slight difference. I'd be interested in feedback on the format at the end of this as well, but I added this viability and minimal section to the solution section. And the viability section talks about what are the things that the MVC absolutely has to have to be viable as like a solution. And here, like the way I've been thinking about it is we have to disallow actions based off of a user's role and or being in a particular group. And the use case that I'm prioritizing is around separation of duties, specifically around the person that is a developer. There needs to be a separation between dev and ops, in the sense that the developer can't also be the person that is also like deploying something to those changes to production. And so that is the kind of the V array that we're structuring like the first iteration of this around, which is I should be able to define a disallowing of seeing the operations tab based off of a user being in a particular group. So that's kind of where we want to start, and what we don't think is important to be in the MVC is allowing like out of role actions, like allowing you to do more than you should be able to do in accordance with like your role in GitLab, reporting, API, version controlling policies in like a structured kind of format that we version control and have like in a repo, and then more complicated kind of conditioning. We want to like, we're fine with keeping this in the UI for the first, gathering feedback and kind of iterating from there. But all those things like we see as like part of the greater vision. Differentiation is all about power and customization. And then there's a policies MVC issue that's linked up here that kind of talks a little bit about the direction that we're kind of exploring right now. But it's pretty early, and we're still kind of converging on a solution, and especially thinking about something we can dog food, because I think that what I just kind of articulated, I'm not sure we'd be able to dog food in GitLab. So I want to make sure that like we quickly like create a use case that's really strong for GitLab Inc. And so we can kind of test this and use it internally from there. I'm going to check the notes again to see if there's
Oh,
questions.
sorry, I wasn't adding to the notes. But you started with this presumption that I thought you were heading towards, hey, we built our initial product with more restrictive capabilities, and now we want to start an MVC that, I don't know, in my head I was thinking of the term like was a smart primitive. But then when you described the solution, I didn't hear like this will be the start of a smart primitive. I heard we're going to just expand the current very structured primitives we have. Did I interpret that wrong?
No, I think that, you know, I didn't use the term small primitive, but I think that's what the intent is. I think that, you know, we thought about iterating on like the what's already in GitLab. And I think that there are a number of trade-offs with that. Like the engineering challenge, I think, is really, really high to iterate on like roles and like customizable permissioning like in the product itself. There's a number of engineering reasons. There's a lot of inertia around that. So the idea is to create a layer that sits on top of our role-based systems you can apply to projects and groups, a la AWS Kubernetes type user policies. The direction that we're thinking is, you know, you can see that creating a policy is something that's intended to be very generic and something that we can iterate towards making something very flexible in the future, and that solves a number of different use cases. So this is just like, there's an effect, it has some type of action on the user experience, and that takes place under like a certain type of condition. So awesome. We define this in code and then we'll iterate on that, but absolutely it's intended to be a primitive.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe you were showing that, but I was looking on my own screen at the Google Doc, so apologies about this.
No, that's great. That's great. Christy, do you want to voice that over?
Yeah, sure. I love that you added the minimal and viable definitions. I think that's super useful and something I'd love to see us doing consistently. So, yes.
Yeah, nice adds, Jeremy. I like that tweak to the format.
Thanks a lot. I think that I've tried to de-emphasize like the details of the solution because I think that we're trying to understand the problem space. But as product managers, we should at least know what has to be in and what can be out. I think the first version.
This is great.
Do you have a plan to test the solution before shipping MVC? Yes. So in the learning goals that we have down here, so I refactored this section a little bit to cover just hypotheses during the solution and launch, because I think that makes a little more sense. The challenges here are, I think right here, which is like, we need to be able to clearly explain the difference between what a user should be able to do based off of their role, and then what they can actually do because of a policy that's specific to the project, and then to make sure we can create a really great user experience. Because I think that has a chance of being really confusing for users, and we really need to test that before we just go out and build something. So I think that the plan is to kind of mock up a few ideas of the experience. Matei, as our designer, is kind of who's rolling off onto growth, is kind of leading this. We're trying to transition that work a little bit, but we want to mock this up and we want to conduct some usability testing on what that experience is going to look like to reduce the risk, because that's where I see a lot of the risk right now is user experience.
Great.
The idea is also like we want to execute this at the group level because we want to include GitLab.com in the total addressable market. So we'll also include that in the mock-ups and the experience, and then we'll test that. We already did some tests. We already on these customer exploration calls. We had some mocks around custom roles. So we had some. We would use half the call to kind of explore and learn about what their needs were, and then we'd use the 5 to 10 minutes to kind of show off the mocks and get some customer feedback. So we'll probably continue to do something similar, and then start to have about 3 to 4 more conversations about this. That are specific to that to make sure we've got the user experience right on the right track.
Can you provide a bit more context on the separation of duties use case?
Yeah, definitely. It's so I mentioned this earlier, where a common pattern in regulated environments is that we have to have a separation between dev and ops. So,
got it. So if you test the code, you can't be the one to push it into production or something like that, or if you wrote it, you can't push it. That kind of thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So there's 2 general patterns here, which is like, if you create a merge request, you can't also be the person that reviews it and merges it. And if you're the person that merges it, you can't be the person who deploys it to production. So, there has to be, we have to disallow that from happening in the application.
Okay.
This is all part of like the larger compliance conversation that's also been happening on Slack as well. So,
What's going on?
There's a big vision we'll talk about on Monday, I think. And I think Matt Gonzalez is who's on the call, is the real expert. I'm going to be supporting him in the coming months.
Welcome, Matt. Day 4, baby. Right in it.
He's been doing an awesome job so far and had a great contribution to that conversation yesterday.
Yeah.
So thanks, Matt.
Great.
Yeah, once I get through the imposter syndrome, I think it'll be great.
Yeah.
Like still working on his onboarding issue.
Yeah, it's okay. Day 4, you can feel that. No worries.
So wrapping it up on the launch and growth side. So I wanted to select a quantitative measurement, and I just said 10% of projects with a policy applied in gold groups on .com 30 days after launch. We can ideally we'll include self-managed in this if we have like strong instrumentation, but I know that I can measure this. If I have to write a SQL query for this or do it in Pendo, we'll get this one way or another.
Yep. And
then we'll also create an issue to get some sentiment and do some follow-up UX research with 3 customers who are using this like after we launch. You can read the press release there. Go to market. I think I really like this section, to be honest, because it let me reflect on like how we're going to roll this out. We're going to do the release post, obviously. I think it's worth doing a blog post and updating our compliance documentation once this goes out, and then doing some internal evangelism kind of on the company call and sales call. Make sure that everyone is aware of this, that CS can kind of start talking with their customers about this and accounts, and kind of get the word out that way. So that is that's it.
Sarah, good PR writers. Both of you did a really good job.
Yeah, this is exceeded my expectations for sure. Nice work. All right, Jeremy, I'll give you the same question I gave Sarah. How was the experience of writing this up, from the content to the doc to this meeting? What would you like about it? What would you change?
Honestly, I think that it's a great forcing function to move a little slower and make sure that we're thinking through problems before we proceed. I actually really liked the conversation. I think it's a great chance for me to make sure that, as I'm speaking, like we actually know what we're talking about. And as I'm talking through the problem space, like I already identified like things that we could be doing better. And so I really like the process. I think it's really effective. And honestly, moving it to a Google Doc was a lot easier. Like I was able to add to the content and not struggle with the tooling quite as much. Yeah. So I think I'm all for it. And I don't think it was not too long. I think that like one of the nice forcing functions of the canvas is to like have clear constraints in terms of the space. So I tried to retain that in the Google Doc, and ultimately I think that, so I did this like over the past like 3 days or so, and it only took me about, I'd say 2 hours to do, 2.5 hours to do.
Perfect.
I don't think it was like an incredible time commitment. I spent more time struggling with the tooling more than anything, but I think it was a great experience. And I tweaked the canvas as I went to, so it made a little more sense. So I think it's great.
Thank you for, I like the Google Doc format better. I think it will be easier for us to collaborate on. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and I like the tweaks that you made to the template, Jeremy. So this was, for me, was super easy to follow. And I really like that it strikes that balance where like issues, the commenting functionality is going to be miserable. Mural made it a little better, but it still had problems. This really resolves that. So this is really good.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so you could also try doing it in GitLab issues too. I have no issues, comparing and contrasting and picking the right format. But I'm happy with this if the team likes it. If y'all want to get it in issues, we can try that too.
Sarah, based off of your experience, do you think this was an improvement? Like, would you rather that we use this instead of Mural?
I would. I think let's try this for the next round.
Cool.
One thing about Google Docs that's a little challenging is the changing of shapes or box or formatting it to be on one sheet. So a future iteration could be a Google drawing, but I like the content and the format currently in the Google Doc. So question, should I convert my mural to that, or can this live in mural? Is that okay?
It's fine with me
Yeah,
to
don't
Okay.
convert it.
just leave it.
Great.
Cool.
All right, and I also want to commend Jeremy and Sarah for getting through their canvases quickly. My last company, these routinely took an hour, so to get through 2 in 1 hour is a really quick pace. So nice job speaking concisely and getting through with a nice talk track.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
And I guess, Scott, to wrap things up, so do you agree with the recommendation to kind of proceed? Do we have a green light
Yeah,
for here?
good question.
Right on. Right on.
Okay, what do we do? Yeah, I'm a go.
All right.
Christy?
Right on.
Yeah, go. All right.
Right on.
Cool. Thanks a lot
Thanks,
for
y'all.
framing this up. Have a good one.
Much appreciated. Great to see
Yep.
y'all.
Bye.
Cheers.